Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is season 1, episode 22. We're getting close to the end here of the season, and this has got 3 stories in it. They're called Take My Life, Please, Devil's Alphabet, and The Library. So, spoilers for the episode. This is a Patreon-sponsored review, so thanks to Cindy for picking the show. This is, I feel like I've said this a few times recently, but this is a very mixed bag of stories. Some which I kind of like, but don't love, and then there's one at the end, The Library, I do think's a little bit, like, it's a nice enough idea, but I think it's kind of poorly executed, and I have some problems with it. So we'll start off with the first story, which notably has 2 faces in it that I recognised. We have Xander Berkeley popping up in a small role in that first story, but we also have Tim Thomerson, who's not a big name by any means, but if you're a fan of like Full Moon Pictures, like direct-to-video movies like Trancers or Doll Man, then you might know who Tim Thomerson is, because he's in that. He's the lead in those movies. But he is a comedian, a big famous comedian who's on TV. The episode starts off with him doing like an interview on a chat show. And the weird thing about this is that whenever they do like a stand-up comedian as a character in like a story, they tend to be painfully unfunny, I've noticed. It's just a common thing. He does a whole thing here where he eats like the skin of a banana as opposed to the banana itself. And everyone's cackling with laughter like it's the funniest thing they've ever seen. And I'm like, what is this? I don't get it. But that's okay, because that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that Xander Berkeley's character was another comedian that he apparently stole stuff from. He stole jokes, he stole like an entire set from. And Xander Berkeley shows up in his car with a gun and holds him at gunpoint, demanding that he, make amends for this and whatever. And because they're in the car, there ends up being an accident. And the main premise of this story is that our main character, Billy, played by Tim Thomerson, is dead, and he is in the afterlife at some kind of purgatory where he's backstage at like a show of some kind, and he's told that he's about to go and perform, and that his existence, where he's going to go in the afterlife, is riding on how he does on stage as a comedian. So he goes out on stage, and the basic gist of this is that he tries to tell jokes awkwardly. If anything, he kind of takes this in his stride a bit too easily. But he starts getting heckled, and the audience kind of like gradually fills up. Not that you see them walking in by any means. They just kind of appear. Like eventually it just looks like there's more people in the room. Because at first there's like one person. Maybe that is whoever judges these things. Who's going to heaven, who's going to hell. And it's basically he gets heckled with demands of like, tell us about what you did to so-and-so. And he has to admit that he stole this material from this comedian. And there's kind of an eerie vibe to this. And this is where I think the story kind of works, actually. Because up until this point, I wasn't really feeling much of it. But the basic gist here is that he admits to what he did. And when he finally just says, I stole his joke, I stole his old set, and I never paid him for it, and I'm a piece of shit, and I did this and this. Then the audience laughs. And they laugh as he's saying the truth. And that kind of becomes this trend throughout the whole thing, where when they heckle him and say, hey, tell us about what happened to your mother, and he tries to bring that up, and he talks about being a crap son, about abandoning her, and about not caring, and so on. Like he basically just starts admitting to different things that he did in his life that have been awful, where one of them's really dark, where he beat up a young woman, like a prostitute, and he had to cover it up because he's kind of famous and he doesn't want to lose his career. So, he kind of tries to justify it and say, well, I get a little bit mean when I'm drunk, and then the crowd laughs. They basically only laugh when he's admitting to something really bad. And it's kind of this, like, him having to admit all of his sins. So yeah, it kind of goes, and then when the story ends and he gets off stage, the guy backstage who kind of like told him to go up is like, hey, you're staying here, you've been booked for 2 eons, you're going to go up there. And he's like, well, yeah, but what am I doing? What's my set? And he's like, what you just did. And he's like, wait, so for eons I have to go up on stage and admit every bad thing I've ever done. And it's like, yeah, you've got a nice room though to stay in. You do 3 shows a night, and if you need anything, just dial 666 on the phone, and they'll get you anything you want. And it's basically just like another, like, someone goes to the afterlife and gets the comeuppance for who they are story, but with a little bit of an interesting spin that it's more tailored to like who he was in life, and that he's going to have to sort of keep giving this stand-up performance and admitting who he is and feeling the pain of who he is, like, over and over again. It's just a little bit interesting to me, just in the sense that it's like, oh hey, we'll treat you really well outside of that stand-up performance, but you have to go up there and be super vulnerable on stage. I think I like the idea that it's such a tailor-made punishment for him, given what he did in life, given that he wanted attention, he wanted to be on stage, he didn't want to give this credit to someone else who he stole from, so he has to go up on stage and make himself super vulnerable and be, you know, not literally but figuratively naked in front of a crowd who are going to enjoy his misery and enjoy that he is, you know, because people often say that if you're a performer of some kind, that you're kind of putting yourself out there, you're making yourself vulnerable, and this punishment is for him to make himself extremely vulnerable. So I kind of liked where it went as it went on, even though, you know, we've had many stories about people who are like being judged in the afterlife or talking to death. Like it's a running thing on Twilight Zone at this point. So that was the first story. It was okay. Like, I didn't love how it started, but I think it had some interesting kind of vibes as it went on. And vibes is a good word to sort of transition into the next story, because the second story, Devil's Alphabet, is about a group of graduating college students in like 1870 or something like that. Forgive the years being a little bit wrong. But they have a society where they kind of like pretend or act like they're part of like a, you know, a devil's cult of some kind. But it's mostly just these rich, pompous students who sit around, drink brandy, have cigars, and talk about all their rules and their charter and all that. But they make a deal, right? They're called the Devil's Alphabet, and they make a deal that this won't be their last meeting. That every year after they're done with school, that they're going to meet once per year in this room, which one of them owns, and we have to come every year. But there's this one character in particular who demands that there be some extra rules and that we be punished if we don't show up in time or if we have to miss. Like, the majority have to decide that the meeting's not happening for it to be okay. Otherwise, the person who isn't here gets fined. But you know, he's a bit more into it. And when they all kind of agree to this, and it's clear they're just kind of taking this as a bit of fun, this one guy like pricks his finger and like signs the thing in blood, and they kind of like go, that was a bit much, but whatever, fine. So the story skips ahead 20 years, and they're all middle-aged now, and they're still meeting for this. But one of them died. One of them took their own life recently before the meeting, so they kind of, like, one of the other things that was sort of joked about when they were signing all this stuff is the guy that was really into it was saying, hey, even death isn't an excuse, right? Even if you're dead, you still have to show up or you'll be punished, kind of thing. So this ended up being like a supernatural kind of ghost like story, effectively, which is a little bit different for Twilight Zone because it's a bit more just fully on supernatural as opposed to anything else. Because basically they're all weirded out that there's a signature on the charter or the records for the guy who's dead, and they're like, wait, that ink looks fresh. Who did this as a joke? And they all get kind of suspicious of each other. But then another one of them takes their own life before the next meeting because we skip ahead a year again, and they're like, wait a minute, what the hell? Like, another one died. Maybe we should stop having these meetings. And the one that was really gung-ho about it, like, is determined that he's going to have the meeting, and the others say, no, we're not coming in. We're all agreeing. The majority have agreed that it's not happening. And it's around here where we start actually getting, like, the visual effect of, like, the shimmer of the person that died. It's sort of a green ghost effect. But this one, so this is the thing. Up until this point in the episode, I was like, okay, these guys are all just pompous rich idiots who think they're having a bit of fun, but this one guy who was really into it is actually put them into some sort of devil's bargain, and it's going to kill them one by one. So there was actually a surprise here for me, because that guy is the next one who dies. He dies at the meeting when he's on his own. And I think the idea here is that because the majority agreed to cancel the meeting, he was the one that was in the wrong, because he still went in and said, no, I'm having the meeting on my own anyway, and he seems to die for it. And then by the time they get to the next meeting, and they're all kind of like debating with each other, like, what do we do? More of them die. In fact, actually, that night, two of them die in a carriage. We get like kind of a fun scene where the horse and carriage gets set on fire. And I'm used to seeing like a car on fire in like movies and TV going down like roads and whatnot. So this was kind of weird to have this period piece, which at this point we're in like 1890 something, and this carriage is just on fire with two of them on the inside, and it leaves only two of them left alive, and then one of them dies before the next meeting with a note kind of left behind for the last survivor. And the survivor is like one of the characters we kind of focused on, who's like a lawyer, and it's kind of, there's a few scenes where he's kind of talking about how we can get out of the deal, and like he's all about finding loopholes and things like that. So the episode ends with him on his own at the meeting, and every other person shows up as a ghost, and they all sit there silently as this sort of like green ghostly effect. And he says, hey, I put forth that we abolish the society, we end the devil's alphabet, and this should be our last meeting. And all the ghosts vote and agree, and he does, and they all disappear, and that's kind of the end of the story. So what do I take away from this by the end? Not a whole lot, honestly, but it did have like I said, at the very start of this, I said it had kind of a good vibe, and that's kind of the thing I like more than anything else. I think them having the period piece element and just kind of the eeriness of them struggling to deal with the fact that there's some true ghostly things happening was kind of fun. It's not a great story by any means, but at the very least, there was kind of a different feeling to it than some of the other stuff. I think it works out much better than, because we had that, like, period piece set in Ireland with the leprechauns a few episodes ago, and I think this is a better period piece than that was. It doesn't really have much of a twist or a spin to it. There's not really some big reveal. I mean, I was surprised. I did think that one guy was going to be kind of the villain of the story because he was more dedicated to it, and then it turned out not to be the case, but there's not really some big twist. There's not really something that sort of makes you go, oh, this is what this was really about. Like, honestly, I always try and think as I'm watching a Twilight Zone story, like if there's a message or a subtext, like something that the story's really about. And this is one where I really was at a loss, where I really couldn't think of anything that this story was kind of getting at. Because it's not, I mean, it doesn't really make sense that it's saying about the dangers of commitments you make to your friends. Like them setting up a reason to stay in touch every year seems like a fairly healthy thing for the most part. Maybe just the idea of messing in the dark arts when you don't really know what it is, I guess. But it's not really something you can apply to anything. I mean, be wary of contracts you sign, I guess. I was kind of left, just kind of lost as to what the intention behind the story was, but it was all right fun. I wasn't mad as I was watching it. There was some entertaining moments. I think the ghost effects when they show up are kind of cool because it's kind of like you see half of them as a green ghost, but it's kind of like only the highlights, so parts of them are still transparent. It was kind of a fun effect. The horse and carriage on fire was a fun scene as well because it felt like a bigger budget moment than you usually get in this show. It felt like they put some time into that. They clearly had a good street to film on. It looked like it was from 1890, and they got some pyrotechnics out, and that was kind of fun. But I wouldn't say that I felt like it did much for me in terms of like made me think about anything or anything like that. So okay, it was okay. Sadly, the last story, I think, is the weakest one of the episode, which is the library. And I think this suffers from just the concept feeling a bit wishy-washy with what it's doing. So the premise here, so Frances Conroy, who I believe is the mum character, or she plays the mum character in 6 Feet Under, so you may recognize her if you've seen that. She gets a job at this private library. And this old woman that sort of greets her and takes her down into this big library area makes it clear that, she's never to read any of the books, and that she's not really supposed to have hired an assistant, but she's struggling with this transition because apparently all the books are going to be turned into holograms because storage is becoming a problem. And we find out basically in this scene, it's explained quite early on, that each book here is a book for each person who's alive on Earth. And actually, this is kind of strange that this is in the same episode as the first story, which is about someone being judged after they die, because she explains that these books are like when someone dies, the book disappears because whoever's deciding where someone goes, heaven or hell or wherever, they read the book. Like, they get the book and look at the person's life from that. And it's like, okay, so that's interesting that we did another story about, where you're going after death, your judgment, effectively. And she agrees to take the job, and she's kind of a little overwhelmed by it. But we get to see her private life. We get to see that she lives with her sister. She, roommates with her. And we see that she wants to be a writer, but she's struggling with writer's block or whatever, but also outside influences. There's like a noisy neighbor who's this kind of... I want to call him a sleazy guy, but I think it's just because he had like a bathrobe on that looked kind of sleazy when he answered the door. But he started dating a woman that lived downstairs, and they're quite happy, and because they're giggling and laughing through the wall and there's music playing, she's getting annoyed. So the episode becomes the main character, Ellie, going into the books, because she looks at her own, and she sees that it kind of ends with, like, literally, oh, she gave in to temptation, and she opened her book. So it's like, oh, this has been written as, as life is happening. She goes to this neighbor's book, right? This asshole who was being noisy and didn't care that he was being noisy and just told her to piss off. She goes to his book and writes in the book. She writes in something different. And when we see her the next day, she's at her apartment. He walks out of his apartment wearing the uniform of a priest. And he says that he's going off to marry someone, and he's now this very calm, holy person who's very quiet and considerate. And it's like, okay, this is interesting that you can just write into the book. I didn't see that being where this went, but fair enough. And then she goes into the apartment, and it turns out that her sister has changed a little bit. Her sister now has a different job. She works at a different restaurant than she did before. It's not a big change. It doesn't really matter that much. But it's like, oh, we're doing a time travel story, kinda. Now, there's no actual time travel happening, but what I mean by that is that it basically operates under the time travel ripple effect rule, where whenever Ellie changes something in a person's book, somehow that changes something related to her as well. And in the case of this story, it's always her sister. Her sister's life always changes dramatically based on whatever she changes with someone else. Because she sees that the woman that was dating the sleazy guy, like, she's now sad and depressed and is like thinking about taking her own life because she's lonely and she thinks she's getting old. The fact that she said that when she was only 37 and I'm almost that age did terrify me a little bit, but she gets upset, and Ellie feels bad because she kind of took this relationship away from her. So she writes into this woman's book the next time she's at the library. She says, oh, this woman is now dating the man that owns the building because he's kind of rich, and that'll give her a nice life. So next time we see this neighbor lady, she's in a fur coat, and she's talking about, going to buy things, and she's very happy. But when she goes up to her apartment, Ellie, and she finds her sister again, her sister is now a lawyer. She's completely changed, and admittedly that probably pays a lot more than being a waitress, so that's a good thing probably. But she's giving financial advice to the guy that owns the building because he is now broke and he's filing for bankruptcy because his wife is spending too much money and he doesn't know how to break it to her, and it's this knock-on effect. Now, this is okay, right? It's a little bit of a weird roundabout way to do it, like a ripples changing, like your decisions and like altering of things with wishes or time travel, like negatively impacting things around your life. It's a bit of a weird roundabout way to get to that story. It's not a bad idea. I think the weird problem I had even at this point, before we get to the ending, is that ultimately, why does it keep changing who her sister is when very little else is changing? It feels like each time she changes something, there should be a change that feels somewhat related. Like, you can understand, like, the thing with the other people does make some sense. Like, she breaks up this relationship, so that leads to the woman being upset because she's lonely. So then she puts him with the guy who's got money, and then when that changes, that guy with money now is not get any money because he's struggling to keep up with a wife that keeps spending everything. There's like a cause and effect where you can kind of follow there to some extent. I'm not saying it's all realistic, but you can kind of follow the logic on some base level. But the sister being a lawyer now? Like, what about this change could have possibly made that difference? Especially since, if we're operating under the idea that this change has sent a ripple through space and time or whatever, why would this couple like getting together in their middle age affect what this sister had been doing in her life up until this point? Like, things should have only have changed from when the timeline changed to them being a couple now, right? So why would this sister's school life and what she studied in a college or university, why should any of that have changed? It didn't really add up to me. It didn't make a lot of sense that her sister kept changing so dramatically, especially since nothing else. We never like get to see anything else in the world change dramatically. It's not like, oh, she changed this one character's relationship life or whatever. So the next time she goes outside, oh no, all of a sudden all the McDonald's are called McBrides. All of the, like something stupid like that. But like this idea that they're like, if you're going to play it like every time she changes something, it's like Destiny rolls a dice and like tons of things change dramatically as a result. I wouldn't love that, but at least it would be established and it would make sense why her sister's changing so much every time. But we never get anything like that. It kind of feels like, for whatever reason, every time she changes something, her sister just changes a lot as well. And there's not really much of a reason for it. And that kind of took me out of the premise a little bit. And honestly, the ending of the episode is that she basically says, okay, I need to like fix all this. Why didn't I just change something about ourselves immediately? And she changes the address that her sister and her live at. She gives them a beach house. So she goes to the beach house. She's all happy. Oh, this is quiet and this is nice. I can get a lot of writing done here. But then she hears some commotion and finds that out down on the beach, her sister is dying because she was drowning. She saved a little girl who was in the water, but now she's dying. CPR's not working and she's freaking out. So she rushes back to the library to try and fix this. But when she goes to find her sister's book, it's not there, because as we learned earlier in the episode, when someone dies, their book is taken away at the request of whoever runs this place, so they can judge if they're going to heaven or hell, wherever else. And this is where she finally admits to the librarian what she'd been doing, that she'd changed some stuff and she wants to fix it. And the librarian makes her get all the books that she ever touched so that she can sort of maybe deal with this. And she kicks her out and says, you can never come back here. And that's kind of like where that's wrapping up, right? And she does point out, and I almost feel this was like the writers like try to fix a plot hole, because at one point the main character Ellie says, hey, I never wanted to be like selfish, like I never just made myself successful. I could have just written that I was a bestseller, that I'd already had a successful writing career, but she wanted to earn that, which does make some sense. But it kind of felt like the writers realized at some point that people would ask that, like, why didn't she just give herself the success she wanted rather than changing all these little things? So this was them kind of trying to bake that in to say, oh no, she still wants to earn the thing that she cares about. She still cares about that. She still wants to achieve that, and she can't achieve that by just giving it to herself. But all this, like, because all the things she's doing are selfish. Like, she's just altering people's lives. As much as that neighbor might have been a dickhead, the fact that his life has been changed and now he's a priest is unfair to him, right? It's unfair that his entire life has been altered without his knowledge. So there's that. But the big thing as well at the ending, though, is that when the main character's thrown out of the library and she's outside, her sister is there. Because earlier on they set up, and before anything changed, before she ever wrote anything in any of the books, the sister said, hey, I'll pick you up at work tomorrow and we can go celebrate your new job. I'll buy you dinner. But then obviously she started changing things, so that never happened. So the end of the episode is that everything's been fixed and we're back in the original reality before anything changed. Her sister's alive, she's here to take her to dinner, and everything, and the main character turns around and starts banging on the door to like thank the librarian for fixing everything. But a stranger opens the door, and this guy's been living here for years with his wife. The librarian and the secret library now never existed here, so that's the one thing I guess that's changed. But the ending, I don't know, the ending felt underwhelming to me because it just fixed everything, right? So it felt like there was no consequences to what she'd done. So the episode just kind of ends with her just sort of thinking about, whoa, everything changed back and the library's not here. Whoa, fade to black, cue the credits, and that's how the episode ends. I just, like, I don't think the mechanics of why things were changing made a whole lot of sense to me. It felt like it was just dipping into, like, what other genres of sci-fi can do, in maybe more interesting ways. And then by the end, it felt like, oh, like the consequence of getting her sister killed is just wiped away, and it's like nothing mattered. So I don't know. I found it unfulfilling with where it went at the end, because it didn't feel like it actually forced her to like learn anything or whatever. You know, it just I don't know. It felt toothless in a big way. And then just the actual thing playing out, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me why just her sister seemed to be changing. Other than the people directly that she was changing, the only ripple effect ever seemed to be her sister. And to the point where I was expecting when she was found out what she was doing, that the powers that be that read these books were intentionally doing it as a punishment and saying, hey, we were targeting your sister every time you change something because you were messing with the forces that you're not supposed to be messing with. But it never did that, so it just kind of felt like, okay, I guess just for the sake of the story, it's going to keep affecting her sister, even though it doesn't actually make much sense that it would be all the time. Especially her job. Why does her job keep changing? Like, why are her neighbors' lives changing, affecting what she had always been building to her life? It doesn't make any sense. So I just think it's really badly executed. The core idea is not terrible, but the core idea is better done in other types of story, usually time travel, but sometimes wish-based stories can work this way with the sort of monkey's paw idea. But it felt like it was going for this weird wishy-washy mix of those things, and that wishy-washiness just made it feel very unsatisfying to me to really get into and care about what was going on. So, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, the last story was pretty weak. I really can't recommend it all that much. But it wasn't torturous to watch, though. I will say that. It was an easy enough watch. It wasn't like some other stories where I'm just like pulling whatever hair I've got left out, trying to wait for it to get to the end. It was fine as a viewing experience, but I feel nothing for it, ultimately, in the end. So, yeah, again, another mixed bag episode. I think the first two stories are decent enough watches, although maybe a little on the shallower side. They're just kind of entertaining, and that's okay. The last story, though, I think kind of has too many problems in its execution and concepts for me to really even just enjoy it in that way that I did the first couple. The first couple had some atmosphere, had some vibes. The last story just kind of felt like it was fumbling the ball with its premise. So, hey, that's my thoughts on this Twilight Zone. I'll be back in a couple of weeks or whatever with the next one. But that is me. So let me know what you thought of this trio of stories in the comments. You can, of course, support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Like, subscribe, all the usual things helps out a bunch as well, of course. But any and all support is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for joining me once again. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.